I don't want to read the Song of Songs, although that's a great idea, right? I want to be the Song of Songs. But I can't just be the Song of Songs, right? I've got to be love in action. And I am evolutionary desire. I'm evolutionary love desire. And evolution is love in action that lives uniquely in me, which is my unique script of desire. Yes, and yes, and yes. But there's a practice. Just like there was a practice of prayer, there's a practice of study, intellectual amorous, right? The intellectual embrace of the divine. There's study, there's meditation, trying to access and locate myself in the field of true self, the field of awareness. But there's a new practice. And the new practice is the practice of writing outrageous love letters. So does everyone have a glass of water next to them? Relaxed, a glass of water. We're hanging out. We're in good space, right? We're sitting in, gathered, right, in the kind of international Zendo, and we're here, right, in Florence, right, to articulate this new story of value. We're gonna tell this story, and we're gonna use Barbie as a way to kind of articulate this new story. And we're gonna do this in two parts. So we've done part one. We delivered on part one, the 4 selves and the 3 selves. That's really, really important, right? For the 2 models of self. It's the first time we've ever put that together in a formal way. Let's maybe just chant for a second. And the best way to chant, my friends, is to, if you're on mute, you can chant either quietly to yourself or out loud with me. And in chant, I open up to the larger field. I move from comforting or arousing my separate self. I move into the actual field, the field of dreams, the field of desire, the field of Eros. And it opens up the eye of the heart, and the eye of the mind, and the eye of value, and the eye of contemplation, and the eye of ecstasy, which are all part of the mind. It's why Einstein made imagination and thought experiments so essential to the way he did physics. So let's just practice and chant a little bit, okay? Maybe a 1-word chant, which is Amor. Amor means love. 2 parts. Amor, 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 amor. Amor, 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 amor. Amor, 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 amor. Amor, 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 amor. Amor, amor, amor. Amor, 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 amor. Amor, 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 amor. Hey, amor, 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 amor. Let the thoughts just move through your mind, through my mind, until we just drop into the center of the chant. Amor, 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 amor. And just stay with the chant. I'm going to do just for the transmission of it the Hebrew words, which come from Luria, which are, I accept upon me the command to intimate communion, to love everyone in the same way that I love myself. Don't worry about the words. It's the same currency of Eros. Hareini mekabel alai et mitzvat abore ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha l'reacha kamocha. Hareini mekabel alai et mitzvat abore ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha l'reacha kamocha. Amor, 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 amor. Amor, 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 amor. Amor, 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 amor. Amor, 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 amor. Amor, amor, amor. And there's a kind of absolute joy that we get from living on the inside of the inside, from living in the God house, in the goddess house, from living in the field. And there's a second chant, which is Ashrei, mad joy. Yoshve vetecha, mad joy to be in the God house together. You know, somehow if we said in Sanskrit, it sounds more sophisticated to do in Marin, right? In particular counties in the United States, but Sanskrit, Hebrew, doesn't matter, right? It's the mad joy to be in the God house. And it's the willingness to make war for peace, right? Meaning, I've got to stand for peace. I've got to do everything for peace, right? And I've got to engage in an internal jihad and the great struggle between good and evil, which lives inside of me, to actually claim the good. And to know ultimately that it's all part of the one love. And it's actually going somewhere, and it's going somewhere that's good, even as I'm just blown away by the mystery and by the tragedy. I somehow manage not to get lost in the tragedy, but I move from the tragic to the post-tragic. And I'm able to live in the joy, to feel the remorse, the pain, but not live only in it, to live in the mad joy. And then when I cast out the kind of depression, the remorse, which paralyzes me, when such as I cast out remorse, so great a sweetness fills my breast. I can dance and I can sing. We can dance and we can sing. We're blessed by everything, and everything we look upon is blessed, writes the poet Yeats. And then we cry out, Ashrei. As David said to Solomon, Ashrei, mad joy, yoshvei, to sit, vetecha, and to be at home. Od yehalelucha, selah. Od yehalelucha, selah. And there's more joy. There's more joy to come. And I am the more joy to come, and you are the more joy to come. So as we step into this big conversation, this big seminar, and again, this is my gift to you, and thank you for allowing me. And when you get exhausted, right, just like you do in a Zazen seminar, right? Sometimes your feet are cramped and you get a little tired and you get uncomfortable. If you ever sat Vipassana, right? But we stay in. So stay in, if you can, to the very end. even when you get uncomfortable. Take notes, walk around, stretch, but we're going to do this big journey together. And what a crazy privilege we can do it. But let's do it from the inside of the inside with mad joy. Ashrei. Ashrei Yoshevei Veitechawa Od Yahalelucha Od Yahalelucha Naninahe Ashrei Yoshvei Veitechawa Od Yahalelucha Od Yahalelucha Narinahe Ashrei Majohi Yoshvei Yoshvei Veitechawa Od Yahalelucha Od Yahalelucha Narinahe Ashrei Yoshvei Veitechawa Od Yahalelucha Od Yahalelucha Narinahe Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha Od Yahalelucha Od Yahalelucha Narinahe Ashrei Ashrei Yoshvei Yoshvei Veitecha Od Yahalelucha Od Yahalelucha Narinahe Ashrei Ashrei Yoshvei Yoshvei Veitechawa Od Yahalelucha Od Yahalelucha Ashrei Yoshvei Veitechawa Od Yahalelucha Od Yahalelucha. Let's take a minute, 2 minutes, and just be inside together. Let's just be inside together in the silence, just for a minute or two. Welcome. Here we go. Part 2. So, and Topher and Christina and Jamie and Krista, we're going to be here at the end, the 4 of us. Okay, here we go. Part 2. So we've done 3 weeks in one mountain talking about what we might call scripts of desire. And scripts of desire are the script of my desire. And there are broken scripts of desire. So there's a script of desire of the separate self who's healthy. So psychology would try and help me write a healthy script of desire. And then there's broken scripts of desire of the separate self. And then you'll have a script of desire which might come from a false self, which is a more broken form of separate self. And then you go to true self, and you're part of the entire field of awareness. There's one dimension of awareness that's beyond all desire, but you're also part of the field of desire, but you're one with the general field of desire. There's not a specific desire, it's just reality desiring. I get to unique self, I begin to become a unique script of desire. Right? My unique self is my unique script of desire. And then evolutionary unique self is the call of the future that lives in my desire, that wants to birth a new emergence, a unique gift that can only be given to reality through my being my unique configuration of desire, from my living my unique life, and ultimately giving my unique gift to the larger whole. Right? So at every level, separate self, true self / mystical self, right? Separate self / psychological self, true self / mystical self, unique self, evolutionary unique self, right? / future self, right? There are scripts of desire. Now, to really get the drama of this and the beauty of it and the why it's so critical, it's this realization that reality is scripts of desire. That's what reality is. And that's reality at its very core. And this is where it gets exciting and important. Reality is not empty. Reality is not hollow. We're not, as T.S. Eliot wrote, we're not the hollow men and the stuffed men. We're full. And we're filled with desire. And we're filled with our unique configuration of desire. But that's what reality is. Desire is not an aberration. Desire is the nature of cosmos. And the sexual models Eros, in that the sexual is defined by, expressed by, it's suffused with desire. And sex models Eros. As we've said many times, the entire book Return to Eros is about that topic. And Eros is the larger field of desire, which is cosmos everywhere, the field of creative emergence, reality's desire to generate ever deeper forms of the good, the true, and the valuable, the good, the true, and the beautiful, ever deeper forms of value. So these sentences are huge, right? And they're deeply rooted in the interior and exterior sciences, but they kind of change everything, right? What they say is that reality at its very core is a story. It's a love story, but it's not just a love story. It's a story of what? It's a story of, anybody? It's a story of love desire. Reality is a story of love desire. Does that make sense? That's step one. Reality is the story of love desire. Now, how do the lineages, I'm just going to do this in several short steps. How do the lineages say this? So this is the essence of the wisdom of Solomon. What's called the wisdom of Solomon that lives at the center of culture as a mystery, because pretty much everyone in this conversation has heard the term. So this term, and it lives all through the world. It's a global term. Okay, it's a global term. So what is the wisdom of Solomon? So the wisdom of Solomon has a primary text. And the primary text of the wisdom of Solomon is the Song of Solomon. It's called the Song of Solomon. It's called the Song of Songs. Okay? And I want to recommend, if I can, to everyone, and I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago in One Mountain, but I want to recommend again, there's a book called A Return to Eros, yay. And it has a chapter called Chapter 9. And Chapter 9 is called The Sexy Song of Solomon. And maybe we'll include this in our Barbie book. But in this chapter, right, The Sexy Song of Solomon, I spend a chapter trying to unpack the Song of Solomon. Because in the lineage, the way the lineage says this is, all of the books of the sacred text are holy or sacred, but the Song of Songs is Holy of Holies. The Song of Songs is ultimately sacred. It's the most sacred. It's the highest. And our colleague Ian McGilchrist, who actually just did a dialogue with Zach, and just did a very beautiful blurb on our new book, First Principles and First Values, writing from an entirely different set of sources than I write, has a sense, and that's where he's unusual, that there's not just value, and this is a distinction I've made for the last, 30 years, there's both value and the sacred. And I was actually surprised to see that show up in Ian. But that's true. There's value, and there's the sacred. And the sacred it overlaps with value, but it's this old, it's like value exponentialized. It's the ultimate good, right? It's the holy. And the holy is it's not just good, but it evokes a kind of awestruck rapture, devotion. Right? I'm in mad devotion to the holy. My heart and mind is blown open by the holy, right? It's like the difference between joy, let's say joy is value, and ecstasy is the holy. Does everyone get that? Right? It's this blowing open of joy into ecstasy, right? That's what the holy is. The holy is the blowing up of value into this kind of ultimate exponential intimacy and goodness. And if you actually read carefully, and I actually did this about, 3 months ago, from 2 a.m. to 5 a.m., I did an in-depth review of probably 200 texts from the classical canon, beginning with Genesis and ending with the end of the prophetic canon, checking the term sacred in the sacred texts of the lineage of Solomon. And the term sacred in the sacred texts of the lineage of Solomon actually is very close to the word ultimate intimacy. Ultimate intimacy. The sacred means ultimately intimate. Okay? So all of the songs, right? The lineage writes, the lineage of Solomon writes, all of the songs are holy. All of the books are holy. All of the books of the sacred texts are holy. They're sacred. But ultimate sacred is Holy of Holies. And what's Holy of Holies? The Song of Songs. So this Song of Solomon is the Holy of Holies. It's the Song of Songs. It's the Holy of Holies. It's the inside of the inside, right? It's everything. And what's it about? It's about desire. It's a song about desire. Yishakenu min shekot pihu. Kiss me with the kisses of your mouth. Ki tovim dodecha miyayin. For your eros, your desire is better than wine. That's the feeling, right, of the text. And you can actually Google a good translation of the text. There's not that many. We tried to do a good translation in chapter 9 of A Return to Eros, but just so you can kind of, feel, a couple of the verses, right? And the entire thing, it opens with kissing. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for thy love is better than wine. His mouth is most sweet. The roof of her mouth is like the best of wine. Kiss me all over, all of me. Your lips cover me with kisses. I have compared thee, O my love, to a stallion harnessed to one of the great chariots. While the king was on my couch, my perfume gave forth its fragrance. The fragrance of my tumescence allures the air. I would cause thee to drink of spiced wine of the juices of my pomegranate. So you understand, right? The book, right? The entire book. His left hand is under my head. His right hand embraces me. Hinach yafa rayati, how beautiful you are, my beloved. Your stature is like a palm tree. Your breasts are like its clusters. I say I will climb the palm tree and lay hold to its fruit. Oh, may your breasts be like clusters of the vine, and the scent of your breath like apples, and your mouth like the best wine. I am my beloved's, and his desire is for me. Right? You understand the sense, right, of the text. So this is a text which is a script of desire. Does that make sense, everyone? It's a text which is a script of desire. And in this text, there's a description of reality, and reality is described as toho ratzuf ahava. Its insides are lined with love, which means that all of reality is scripts of desire. So far, so good? Now let's go deeper. Remember, we saw earlier, and maybe Krista will now show it to us again because it's going to be particularly helpful. Now it'll be easy to access. We saw the name of God. Remember, we saw the name of God a little earlier? We're about to see it again, right? The four-letter name of God, right? In, let's say, the Wisdom of Solomon tradition. So this four-letter name of God in the lineage, this is the basic structure of reality. So, for example, one erotic scientist, the interior scientist Nachmanides, writes, citing the sacred text, he says, all of reality is names of God. That's what reality is. Reality is just different spellings of the name of God. Now, what's the name of God? The name of God is, from right to left, the Yud enters the Hey, right? It's the act of the Yud making love to the Hey. Then the third letter is the Yud pulled down. Both the Yud and the Hey, the Yud and the Vav, are both phallic. The Vav is the third letter. And then the last two letters, the Vav enters the Hey. So the Yud enters the Hey, that's called constant Eros. And the Vav enters the Hey is called aroused Eros. Two passages in the Zohar in the 13th century. So when I say all of reality is names of God, that sounds like a pious statement, right? Now let's come back and find us again, okay? We'll let the image go. Thank you so much. When we say all of reality is names of God, what do we mean? What we mean is that what? Anybody? What do we mean? We mean that all of reality is scripts of desire. Does everyone get that? So you have the Song of Songs, which is the primary text of the lineage, which is a love song, which is essentially a script of desire, which says, Toho ratzuf ahava, its insides are lined with Eros. So reality is Eros. And another way of saying it would be all of reality is names of God. The name of God is itself a script of desire, a story of desire. This notion of reality being scripts of desire, right? Reality is Eros. Reality is names of God, is the realization of both the interior and exterior sciences. It's what systems theory and chaos theory and complexity theory are saying. It's what geometries are pointing towards, right? It's what, right? In essence, reality is coded with patterns of intimacy. Reality is coded with patterns of relationship, right? That's the nature of reality, right? And you actually have, right, in the great traditions, you have, right, always schools that actually realized this, right? They stepped away from the exoteric public teachings of ritual, and they said, no. Actually, right, the whole thing, right, is scripts of desire. So, for example, I'll just, open, for example, Meister Eckhart, right, describing reality, says reality is always kissing. It describes reality as they're always kissing. They can't control themselves. Right? It's not possible that any creature can have greater instincts and perceptions than the depth of the human mind. So God ripened me so I see it's true. all objects in existence are wildly in love. Right? That's the realization. And it's the realization, says Meister Eckhart, is that all objects in existence, right, are, right, wildly in love. Right? Existence leans its mouth towards me, writes Meister Eckhart, because my love cares for it. Right? So in other words, you get this sense, right, and it lives across traditions. Right? It lives across traditions. Right? I'll just give you another, right, from the same. Every creature has a religion, every foot is a shrine. A secret candle burns. Every cell in us worships God. Every arrow is the bow of desire, which has rushed out in hope of nearing him. Right? And you can find versions of this literally, right, in every single great tradition. Right? I mean, that's essentially what Sufis are talking about. Right? You know, he desired me, so I came close. No one can near God unless he's prepared a bed for you first. 1,000 souls hear his call every second. But most everyone then looks in their life's mirror and says, I'm not worthy to leave this sadness. When I first heard his courting song, I too looked at all I had done in my life and said, how can I gaze into his beautiful eyes? I spoke those words with all my heart, but then she sang again a song even sweeter. And when I tried to shame myself once more from her presence, she showed me her compassion and spoke her truth. Come close, for I desire you. Right? In other words, this strain of texts, right, that understands, right, that all of reality, right, all of reality in some fundamental sense, the one I just read you is Saint Teresa of Avila, by the way, living at the same time as, right, John, right, the man of the cross. That's Saint Teresa of Avila. But it's always, right, it's always the same story. It's always the same story. Right? It's always the sense of this radical eros, right? This radical love. Right? It's one of my favorite poems. I'll give you a couple of versions of them, but you actually can kind of get it in a deep way. I'm going to go to the beginning here. Hold on. Sing my tongue, sing my hand, sing my feet, my knee, my loins, my whole body. Indeed, right, I am his choir. Or, there are so many positions of love, each curve on a branch. The 1,000 ways your eyes can hold us, the infinite shapes each mind can draw. The spring orchestra of fragrance and sound wafting through the air. The revolution of the earth's skirt, whose fold contains all worlds. The currents of light exploding like passionate lips. If God invited you to a party and said, everyone in the ballroom tonight will be my special guest, how would you then treat them when you arrived? Indeed, indeed. And Hafiz knows that there is no one in this world who is not standing on her jeweled dance floor. Right? Right? I mean, you get it? Right? I've come into this world to see this, the sword drop from men's hand, even at the height of their anger. Indeed, we have finally realized that there's just one flesh to wound, and it is his, the Christ's, our beloveds. I've come into this world to see this. All creatures hold hands as we pass through this miraculous existence we share on the way. Ecstatic light, forever entwined and at play with him. Every song the earth has sung since it was conceived in the divine womb and began spinning from his wish. All of it a love song. Right? And it goes right on and on and on. Know the true nature of your beloved. In her loving eyes, your every thought, word, and movement is always, always already beautiful. And maybe I'll finish with this one, right? And this is about the secret of the kiss, written by a group of Sufi interior scientist writers. And one writes, "One regret that I am determined not to have when I'm lying upon my deathbed is that we did not kiss enough." Right? Like, cha. And then finally, this is about a courtesan. Quietly her fame spread, the courtesan who few had heard of a year ago. Shy men could do with her what they could do with no one else. And women too sought her breasts and came to know how wonderful touch could be. And she wrote poems and left her eyes there, for they were what loved the most. And this is the last one I want to read because this is going to take us to the next step. I want to read this again, okay? Quietly her fame spread, that courtesan who few had heard of a year ago. Shy men could do with her what they could with no one else. Shy men could do with her what they could do with no one else. And women too sought her breasts and came to know how wonderful touch could be. And here's the last stanza. And she wrote poems and left her eyes there, meaning she left her eyes in the poem, for they were her eyes what loved the most, right? For they were what loved the most, right? And so this kind of sense of she wrote poems. So this writing of poems is this, these are all forms of the Song of Songs. Does everyone get that? These are forms of Shir HaShirim. These are forms of the Song of Solomon. And we've given a name to this, right? In Cosmorotic Humanism, we've called these poems, outrageous love letters. That's what we've called it. In other words, what we've basically said is, right, in this new story of value called Cosmorotic Humanism, is that we have to democratize great love. You begin to see that's what Homo Amor is. Homo Amor is the democratization of great love, in which I don't leave it to Rumi. I don't leave it to Hafiz. And I don't leave it to Rabia. I don't leave it to St. John on the Cross. I don't leave it to Teresa of Avila, right? I become outrageous love. And by outrageous love, we mean something very precise, right? Right, Suzette, right? We mean by outrageous love, we mean not love as a social construction, but that reality is a love story all the way up and all the way down. I'm a unique script of desire in that reality. And I have the capacity to be a mad lover. Which is why, you know, as we're trying to kind of come together and to form this intimate communion, which then forms this revolution to kind of tell this new story of value, which is what happened in Florence in the Renaissance. You can't come together as a structured think tank, right, where everyone has a particular job and think they're going to functionally do this. We have to come together as outrageous lovers. We have to come together as a chavraya kadisha, right, a band of the sacred, but the sacred means ultimate intimacy. And I mean that philologically. Philologically, the sacred means ultimate intimacy. There's a man named Eliezer Berkovitz, right, who, when he died, his son gave me the key to his apartment, Dove, right, and I went and kind of went through all his books, right, and he had a book that he had published in Wayne State University Press, which was a book where he did a philological examination of the term the sacred, right, and he, you know, really understood correctly, and I came to the same conclusion he did, and I was ecstatic to read him, right? And I don't know if this essay is actually republished anywhere, but he actually understood that the sacred means ultimate intimacy. That's what the sacred means. The intimate and the sacred are the same, right? So the Song of Songs is, right, Jamie, Holy of Holies. The Song of Songs is Holy of Holies means it's intimate of intimate, right? Meaning it's a love story. But if I democratize enlightenment, I've got to democratize great love, right? In a book called Radical Kabbalah, I was privileged many years ago to talk about the democratization of enlightenment, which means that all of us should have an experience of true self, where I experience myself as part of the enlightened field. I'm not separate from the field. That's the first step. And in Unique Self, right, the book in 2011, we talked about the democratization of enlightenment. But now we need to go the next step. And the next step is the democratization of flaming great love. Right? We actually need to literally become outrageous lovers. We need to become evolutionary lovers. And it's I am great love, right? And I am great love means I don't leave it to Rumi, right? You know, we often say that when we want to send someone a love note, we send them some words written by a dead Persian, with all due respect to Persians, right? Not a good idea, right? It's I am Rumi, I am Solomon, or I am Meister Eckhart. But I am means, and this is critical. I mean, so most of us have written love poems at one point in our lives, right, Jane? Was there some point I wrote a couple of words in a love poem, right? And then we stop because they're a little stilted and they're a little convoluted and they take a little time and they make us feel a little funny. But remember that little moment, right, where I wrote some beloved of mine. It might have been my child, it might have been a partner, it might have been a friend. I wrote them a little, you know, stilted love note. And then I kind of quit and I send people Rumi poems. Don't do that, right? In other words, write outrageous love letters. So in other words, the idea of writing outrageous love letters is the practice of the Song of Songs. That's the Song of Songs is literally a series of outrageous love notes between a lover and a beloved. That's literally what it is. And if you all follow the exegesis in the Song of Songs and you read the Song of Songs carefully, you realize these are love notes between a lover and a beloved. And so there's a whole strain in scholarship which says, well, this book's not sacred. This is just a bunch of tavern songs, love notes. And sometimes scholarship can be excessive in its idiocy. Of course it's tavern songs. That's the point, right? The point is, that's what they know in the tavern. What they understand in the tavern is that it's all a love song. And my life is destitute and I'm wrecked and I'm poor. But oh my God, in the love song, it all stops for a moment and it's good, right? It's good, right? I can feel the gorgeous, delightful pleasure of reality, right? Alive and awake and flaming. And I don't wait for someone else to do it. I don't want to read Rumi. I want to be Rumi. I don't want to read the Song of Songs, although that's a great idea, right? I want to be the Song of Songs. But I can't just be the Song of Songs, right? I've got to be love in action. And I am evolutionary desire. I'm evolutionary love desire. And evolution is love in action that lives uniquely in me, which is my unique script of desire. Yes, and yes, and yes. But there's a practice. Just like there was a practice of prayer. There's a practice of prayer. There's a practice of study, right? Intellectual amorous, right? The intellectual embrace of the divine, which Chaim of Voloshin talks about in a book called Nefesh HaChaim, the soul of life, right? Shar Dalet, section 4 is about this intellectual embrace of the divine. It's a stunning book, right? So there's an intellectual embrace of the divine. There's praxis. So there's prayer, there's study, there's meditation. Right, where in classical meditation, I try and access and locate myself in the field of true self, the field of awareness. But there's a new practice. And the new practice is the new practice of Homo Amor. And the new practice is the practice of writing outrageous love letters. Right? So Jane, I pick up a pen and I say, Dear X, fill in the blank, and I write an outrageous love letter. Now, when I write an outrageous love letter, how do I do it? Let's get real for a second, okay? Let's get real. So the way you write an outrageous love letter is, you have to first bracket your ego, because your ego is hearing what you write and it wants to remain socially acceptable and proper and appropriate. And you're kind of, even though you're writing it yourself, you're afraid that somebody is going to read it someplace, some imaginary person, right? In your early life is going to read this and you're like, oh my God, I can't have somebody read this. Maybe it's going to be discovered. It's not a real worry. It's like this inner voice. You have to bracket the voice of the ego. You have to actually access the fullness of the field, right, running through you. And then what you have to do is you've got to wildly exaggerate until you're accurate. That's how you become accurate, right? And when you wildly exaggerate, you become accurate. Does that make sense? Right? So that's an outrageous love letter. And then you've got to write outrageous love letters every day. It's got to be part of my fabric. Just like I breathe, I write outrageous love letters, right? I can write them to myself. I can write them to a friend. I can write them to a beloved. I can write them to a cab driver that I met, right? I can write them to, right? In other words, right, outrageous love letters is the democratization of great love. And the democratization of great love means two things. One is I'm a great lover, right? And I'm a unique script of love desire, and I'm writing outrageous love letters, right? And outrageous love letters are the new Song of Songs. Does that make sense? We're literally writing sacred texts. They're the new Song of Songs. Now, there's two forms of outrageous love letters, right? There's two forms of outrageous love letters, okay? And so the funny thing to say here would be, right? Make sure there's no kids around, but that's actually not right either, right? As I was sharing with Obbs, right? A little while ago, it's a point that Warren Farrell has made in his writing, and we've all noticed it. But I want to credit Warren because he wrote about it, 30 years ago, which is, when parents walk through and they see their kids watching, and they're seeing their kids watching this excessively violent film. People are killing each other, smashing each other, right? They walk by, kids are occupied, good, it's all good. But if you walk through and, God forbid, there's some breast showing, oh my God, what are you watching? It's terrible. And you have to understand that actually goes into the child. And it's a traumatization. Now, I'm not saying that you should have, right, displays of, private intimacies on public networks. That's not my point. My point is the trauma that we feel around it. That's a different conversation. But the trauma we feel around it is actually pours into the child. It feels like something's wrong here. There's something wrong. Does everyone get that? You get the point? So there's a book, if I can just share with you just for a second, just to get the point. There's a book that, and I think Topher, we might have talked about this, right? There's a book, which is on my bookshelf someplace, right, called Mary's Mosaic. It's an incredible book, right? So Talia, this is free. There's a book recommendation for you. I got to toss one back, okay? So Mary's Mosaic, right, is about a woman who had an affair with John JFK, and she was killed several months after he was killed, right? There was a kind of, the Central Intelligence Agency, kind of Virginia, Northern, Virginia, kind of, and Washington, they were the kind of masters of the universe, right? It's fairly apparent that they were, and this is not conspiracy theory. There's an enormous amount of documentation that whatever happened with John F. Kennedy's assassination certainly wasn't a lone gunman. That's for sure. There's an enormous amount of information on that. That's not our topic. And so very, very early on, Mary, who had this, significant, affair with Kennedy, right? So she starts saying they killed him, right? Her husband was one of the senior guys at the CIA. It's a long story. So she was killed jogging, 6-8 months later, however that happened. And, a friend of her son's writes this book about her called Mary's Mosaic. And it's a book about that era and that story. And it's kind of an unknown book. It's quite good. And you want to capture something of America of that era, something of Eros. It's a fascinating book. And there's one scene where this friend of her son's writes that, he came to their house, to their kind of like, she's the wife of a major CIA, executive, if you will. So they're living in a kind of sprawling, Washington, Virginia home. And he comes and his friend doesn't realize he's coming over. So he comes to the backyard and he sees her bathing naked in the back. And he tells this beautiful story where she sees him, he sees her, and she looks up at him and she just smiles. This gentle, profound, beautiful purity smile. She didn't go like, ah! She just smiled. Like the goddess smiled. And just nodded. And the kid says, and he nodded. And he respectfully, turned around, and went the other way. And he said, in that moment, he knew what purity meant. He knew what goodness meant. Can you feel that? Right? It's like, wow. Right? That's the goddess. That's the goddess, right? That's the goddess. That's the, right? She knows the truth. There's always the goddess. And sometimes the goddess is the mother, right? And sometimes the goddess is the courtesan, right? As we just read in Hafiz. And sometimes the goddess is the sister. Sometimes the goddess is the beloved, right? So that's this notion of outrageous love letters. And then there's outrageous erotic love letters. There's outrageous erotic love letters. And outrageous erotic love letters are the same as outrageous love letters, but they translate into Eros. And to write an outrageous erotic love letter is to write to a beloved of your beauty, right? the dazzling, and what is the Song of Solomon? It's not an outrageous love letter, it's an outrageous erotic love letter. Right? Is that right? So there's two kinds of outrageous love letters. There's outrageous love letters, outrageous erotic love letters. Right? And when I started doing a kind of piece of work, right, before we met in a different context with Dr. Kincaid, Christina, so we must have done, you know what, several years of outrageous love letters, right? And so over the last, I would say, 14 years, you know, between all of us, right, Simona, right, we must have written, you know, I don't know, 30,000 outrageous love letters, right? That's some insane amount, right? All of us together. So what are we doing, right? And if you really want to understand the think tank's not decipherable without outrageous love letters, right? In other words, the fabric of the think tank is a set of texts. And those texts are outrageous love letters. And they're outrageous erotic love letters, depending who's writing to who and what the context is. And it's people writing to each other. But there's an invisible text of the think tank. The think tank is, if you will, kind of our public guys. But our essence is, right, we write, you know, and usually, you know, in a particular period of time, there's a couple of people who kind of hold that energy. There's different times, right? You know, for 5 years, right, maybe Pauline held it, you know, in 2011 and 12, and then KK for 3-4 years, and then, right, in other words, et cetera, et cetera. But in other words, the point is that different people at different times, right? Zohar, we know something about outrageous love letters, right? There's this huge practice, right? Zach and I wrote outrageous love letters, right, for a couple of years, right? Tom Goddard wrote outrageous love letters, right? Jeff Hilliard, outrageous love letters, right? And I always say, kind of somewhat jokingly, right, that you write outrageous letters to young, old, men, women, all gender fluid in between, and small mammals, right? Just to kind of cover everything, right? But the point is, right, outrageous love letters, it's the structure of reality we've exiled. We've made it so narrow and so small, right? So reality is scripts of desire, right? The Song of Songs, right, is an expression of reality, script of desire, right? And then the democratization of the Song of Songs is I become Solomon. I become Rumi. And when I become Rumi and I become Solomon, I write outrageous love letters, because what the Song of Songs is outrageous love letters, right? And so Ted, we said the other day, Ted and I write each other a little love note every day, right? Right? And so by the way, just to say, my detractors, of which there are a number in the world, I haven't met most of them, you know, probably 99%, they don't bother meeting or talking to me, but, you know, my detractors, you know, the way they would tell the story is, oh my, this is just an excuse to be kind of sexual, right? Which is, of course, ridiculous, right? In other words, first off, it demonizes sexuality as if that was bad, number one. That's problem one. But problem two is that's not the point. The whole thing's about Eros, right? And when you don't actually have an experience of God, right, and you're a scholar, for example, you say that God is a construct created as a human crutch because you have no experience of it. So what must it be? That's the only thing it could be. But if you have no experience of outrageous love, right, so the only way you could interpret someone writing outrageous love letters, it must be some sort of fiendish maneuver, right, for some sort of totalitarian control of some kind of sinister kind, because you've never experienced it in your body, in your heart, in your soul. There's nothing more awake and more alive than writing an outrageous erotic love letter or an outrageous love letter, right? When you're writing an outrageous love letter, you don't say to yourself, what's the meaning of existence, I wonder? Not sure, right? So we write each other, men and men, women and women, right? And there's different moments, right? You're right. You can't write, right? There might be a moment, right? These 5 years we're writing. A couple of us are writing together, and but there's always, we're all holding this together, right? There's one beautiful couple who went out for a while, right, in the center, and they stopped going out, right? And he said to she, in this particular case, you know, I want for like the 6 months after we're not going out anymore, I want to write you outrageous love letters. What a beautiful thing to do, right? In other words, instead of kind of love being this kind of egoic structure, right? And if we're not going out in that formal way, right, we've got to change the locks and demonize each other. Actually, no. We were together for a period of time and it was very beautiful. And now in our separation, we're actually going to love each other in a new way. We're going to write outrageous love letters, right? It would be a different world if people separated and for 6 months wrote each other outrageous love letters, right, as part of the separation. Or we're living in a different universe. That's outrageous love, right? That's outrageous love, okay? So that's this notion of scripts of desire. Okay, so let's kind of hold that there. That's part two. That's the end of part two.